session to order to discuss the Mid-Currituck Bridge update from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. We have several distinguished guests here today, so I will let Mr. Sawyer introduce everyone. We're happy to have you, Mr. Sawyer. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you. Glad to be here. My name is Ronnie Sawyer. I'm the division engineer with the DOT for Division 1. And like Mr. O'Neill said, we are here to discuss Mid-Currituck Bridge and do our best to answer any questions after the discussion. I have with me today David Wasserman. He's a Deputy Director of Division of Planning and Programming. He's going to be doing the meat of the presentation. And David Roy is with us virtually. He is the Director of Innovative Finance with the Turnpike Authority, also with the DOT. Okay. And also with me, I have our board member, Tess Judge, and our Division Maintenance Engineer, Marshall Gill. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wasserman, and we're going to go through the presentation.
Senator Bobby Hanning.
And Senator
I
Bobby
can't forget him. He's camouflaged today. You couldn't hardly see him.
This is recorded, right?
Yes.
So we're going to just jump into the presentation. Mr. Wasserman is going to give it a start, and after that, we'll just have any kind of discussion that you would like to have related to the bridge.
Good afternoon. As Ronnie mentioned, I'm David Wasserman, the Deputy Director of the Division of Planning and Programming in Raleigh, and really to talk here today to talk about the Mid-Currituck Bridge. There you go. We'll just give a quick overview.
Is his microphone on?
Of the STIP. Was that?
Make sure you're being recorded through the microphone there.
I believe so. All right. Can you guys hear me now?
There we go.
All right. Yes. Much better. All right. Thank you. We'll give an overview of the State Transportation Improvement Program and how projects are selected and the funding first to make sure everyone has a background of how this project came to fruition in terms of being funded. Then we'll talk about specifically the Mid-Currituck Bridge. Real quickly, we'll hit what we call a comparative analysis that was done for the toll project, and then provide options going for the being put in front of the RPO board to consider. So to start with, let's talk about the STIP, also known as the State Transportation Improvement Program, and the Strategic Transportation Investments, also known as STI, the prioritization process. You're going to hear me use the term STI several times throughout this. And just for reference, that is the law that was passed in 2013 by the legislature and signed by the governor that directs how transportation projects are selected and funded in the state. So the STIP itself is the department's blueprint for the next 10 years. It lists the most capital projects that the department expects to deliver over the 10-year time period. And for the current STIP, it's the 2026 to 2035 time period. It has about $32 billion worth of funding over this period, includes all the projects, their associated costs, funding, and schedules. And it has to be in compliance with state and federal law. On the state side, again, is that STI law, that Strategic Transportation Investments Law, that directs and how the department shall select and fund transportation projects. It has to be fiscally constrained. In other words, we can't over-program by more than a certain amount over this time period. And then it's a living document. It's updated on a monthly basis. So the STIP, there are 22 different funding buckets or funding categories in the STIP. And again, this is all based on STI law. There's what's known as the statewide mobility bucket, where 40% of the funds go to this bucket. And projects that you are going to find in this bucket, your interstate maintenance projects, your bridge projects, safety projects, and then projects selected through the prioritization process. And I'll talk about that more here in a few minutes. The second set of buckets is called the regional impact bucket, and here's where 30% of the funds go. And that bucket is then subdivided even further into 7 different other regions or other buckets.
Where's the Raleigh bucket?
Raleigh bucket's C. But the buckets are made themselves of paired divisions. So I'll show you in a map here what those divisions are here in a second. But the percent of the money that goes into each of those buckets is based on the percent of the state's population. So Region A, which is where we are here in Division 1, is composed of Divisions 1 and 4. 8% of the funds go into the Region A
How many
bucket.
was that? 8?
8, roughly 8% of the funds. And so similar to statewide mobility, you fund bridge projects, safety projects, and then projects selected through the prioritization process. Was there a question? And the last set of categories is the division needs buckets, and this is where the remaining 30% of your funding goes. And it is divided equally between the 14 transportation divisions or highway divisions across the state. And so every one of these 14 divisions gets initially the same amount of money, and then we have to consider bridge projects, safety projects, projects selected by the metropolitan planning organizations, other projects such as economic development projects, and then projects selected through the prioritization process. So this is a map of 100 counties of the state showing the different NCDOT divisions. Again, we're in Division 1, the northeast part of their state, and you can see we're in Region A. The question is, where is Raleigh earlier? Raleigh is in Wake County, and that's in the Division 5 and Region C. For reference, Charlotte is Division 10, and that's Region E. So the STI law defines the types of projects that are eligible in each of the categories. In the statewide mobility category, it's your interstates, your other your routes on the national highway system, military routes, and most importantly for the Mid-Currituck Bridge, designated toll facilities. And as you'll see here in a few minutes, what this means is that projects that are eligible for funding in the statewide mobility category, they actually have 3 chances of getting funded. It could be in the statewide category, the regional category, or the division needs category. So the way the process works is that projects are submitted through this prioritization process by metropolitan planning organizations, rural planning organizations, and NCDOT divisions. They go into our Strategic Planning Office of Prioritization, affectionately known as SPOT, where the SPOT office reviews the data, in fact, then sends the data back to our partners at the RPOs and divisions to make sure the data that's being used to calculate the scores is accurate. And then the SPOT office then calculates those scores. So then, and that's where we are in the current prioritization cycle, known as Prioritization 8.0 or P8. So then what happens is, once we have the quantitative scores of all projects being evaluated through the prioritization process, we then program projects that are eligible for funding in the statewide mobility category. And we literally we have all projects ranked or sorted by score in descending order, and we go down the list till we run out of funds. But then what happens is that projects that don't make the funding cut in the statewide mobility category, that are eligible for funding in the regional impact category. Where here, instead of the score being 100% based on data, it's 70% based on data. And that remaining 30% of the total score is based on local input from the divisions and the RPOs and MPOs. And so again, we assign totals. Once those local input points are assigned, all the scores are totaled, and just like in the statewide category, we go down the list in each of the 7 different funding buckets until the funding is used allocated to the projects. And then lastly, projects that don't make the funding cut in the regional impact buckets, they're eligible for funding in the division needs. It's very similar to regional impact. The RPOs, MPOs, and divisions assign their points, and we total up the scores and then go down each of the 14 different buckets until funding runs out. So big picture, this is how the prioritization process works.
Is there a panel that does the scoring?
I'm sorry, can you
Is
repeat?
there a panel makeup up for the scoring process?
There's not a panel makeup. What it is you have a work group of professional staff that makes recommendations to the Board of Transportation on how the scoring process should work, the data, the formulas, and so forth. Okay. And that work group, they meet on a regular basis, monthly or every 2 weeks, typically at the beginning of each work group cycle. And they make those recommendations ultimately to the Board of Transportation, but the Board of Transportation is the one who ultimately signs off on the scoring process.
So they're constantly looking at the data as it changes?
Correct, okay. Yes.
What type of data are they looking at?
I'm sorry?
What type of data points do they look at?
I will hold that thought. I'll get to that in a second. And here you are. Perfect time, perfect segue. So in terms of how the department evaluates projects from a quantitative basis, on the highway side, we have 6 different criteria, and it's really 5 different criteria per each of the funding categories. So you're looking at congestion, which is essentially looks at traffic volumes and the carrying capacity of the roadway, looks at the travel time savings and the safety benefits the project is expected to provide over a 10-year period against the cost of the project. That's the benefit cost calculation. We look at safety of existing crashes and, again, the expected safety benefits. Account for key indicators of freight movement, truck volumes and truck percentages. In the statewide category, it looks at the economic competitiveness of an area. What's the percent of the change in the economy that the project is expected to provide? And in the regional impact and division needs category, we look at improving access to where the jobs are. And so with economic competitiveness, it is only eligible for statewide per STI law. Accessibility and connectivity, that criteria is only eligible in the regional and division needs category. So does this answer your question about the data being used? One thing I would like to point out, where we do look at traffic volumes, we actually account for seasonal variations of it. So we use something that's known as a peak ADT factor. So a project, let's say the Mid-Currituck Bridge, when that scored up, it probably had a pretty high score, or would have a high score it would account for seasonal variations of traffic here.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that on the statewide mobility calculation, the congestion criteria and the economic competitiveness criteria actually hurts the rural areas as compared to the more urban areas?
I'll be honest, the congestion criteria, there's typically the projects that score well are more in the urbanized areas because of the amount of congestion you experience in Charlotte, Raleigh, Asheville, Wilmington, where there's congestion several hours throughout the day. The economic competitiveness, though, is actually, to some degree, it may actually benefit the rural areas. And I say that because if you have a project that's going to bring in, let's say, 300 jobs to an area, right? The economic impact is greater in, let's say, Currituck County than it would be in Wake County. So that's really where it may help the rural areas to some degree.
Thank you.
Does that account for housing growth, like expected housing growth? Like take Currituck, for instance, if we have 15 houses being built a year, or on the books, that's projected congestion, but I don't see that anywhere as an issue.
So where the housing growth would factor into is the travel time savings. We use a statewide model that looks out 10 years to see where the congestion will be in 10 years in the future. So that's the best place that we account for that. We don't get down to the number of houses per se that are added to an area and showing the impact on the roadway.
So what I'm asking is, does it provide for projected growth?
It does. We do forecast. That model that's being used forecasts out 10 years. It's a higher level model than a model that looks at individual towns and individual areas.
Where does that fall in under here?
So the travel time, that's in the travel time savings, so that would be in the benefit cost. It's one of the benefits that's accounted for. It's also in the inherent to the economic competitiveness criteria. We also do, one of the main inputs is the travel time savings there. So a project with a lot of travel time savings, could impact, there definitely could be a large impact on the score on the economic competitiveness criteria too, depending on where it's located.
How is a new route compared to an existing route? Like if you're, as an example, in Wilmington, they're getting ready to get a new $1 billion bridge that's going to be replacing an existing bridge versus our bridge is a new route. So the traffic count that you would do would have to be somewhat different and how you weigh it. How do those factors weigh into this, or do they?
They do. So we have to get a lot of this data is based on existing conditions, right? So we have to get that existing conditions from what we call a parallel route. So for example, the volumes, the data that's coming for Mid-Currituck Bridge was likely pulled from, let's say, the Wright Brothers Memorial Bridge out there. But when we look at like travel time savings, we say, all right, hey, if you're going from A to B, and now you have to do, I don't know the travel
Right.
time there, but let's say it's 45 minutes, right? And now I can make that trip in 10 minutes versus 45 minutes. That's a significant amount of travel time savings that the project
An
is
hour to
expected to
10 minutes,
provide.
that would be
That's, are
probably.
you
good.
talking about
That'd be-
45 minutes just to get through Duck?
Is there
Oh, yeah.
is there anything that goes into the calculations when you have alternative routes? Because if you drive from here to Kerala, there's one way to get there, and that's the one way. And if there's 7 hours of traffic, there's 7 hours of traffic. If you're in Raleigh and you hit a bunch of traffic, the GPSs will reroute you. And you can take this road to that road and go around stuff. We don't have that option out here. Is that accounted for in any of these scoring mechanisms?
Good question. It's just like the Waze apps where they have the different apps where you can see, and then all that does is make the traffic work. I'm law enforcement, so it makes it worse. So where they look, and then they'll cut down Sawyertown Road and Mayock or Guinea, and then those side roads back up, and then the light cycles out more because of the new apps to save time, which actually makes it worse. But like he's saying, it's the same thing. There's one way in the summertime. You got a better chance in a John boat to make it across from Idlet to Kerala than you do with paddling. That's not with a motor, paddling. Than you do in a vehicle to make it around, because it's an hour through Duck.
Yeah.
So to answer your questions, like are the traffic volumes that are accounted for during the peak hours would account for that, right? You're going to have higher traffic during that peak session, right? And so that's where that would likely show up. If there's only one route, all the motorists are concentrated on that single route versus if there's an incident on 40 in Raleigh, that's kind of dispersed to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Could you explain, and I know we're here talking about the Mid-Currituck Bridge, and I know what you're working on now is trying to explain, how the funding kind of all comes together, because I've been through your presentation, and I know at the end you're going to get to where we are in the funding gap. But talking about the safety criteria, so it says here, safety, the measure is existing crashes along or at the project and calculate future safety benefits. So I know one of the reasons that's been given over the years for the Mid-Currituck Bridge is a safety impact from hurricane evacuation and things of that nature, but that doesn't seem to really kind of fit into this definition of safety. So can you talk to whether that was accounted for with this particular project?
So I can say the safety focus on the crash density, the crash severity, and I think the number of crashes. I have to go back and look at it, but it does not account for hurricane evacuation. So I will say, I mentioned the work group of professional staff that meets prior to every prioritization cycle. There was a lot of discussion about hurricane evacuation and how that could potentially be incorporated into what's known as prioritization 4.0 back then. But unfortunately, the law limits the names of the criteria that can be used in project evaluation, and hurricane evacuation is not one of those, or evacuation routes in general. So again, there was a lot of discussion about this, but ultimately that work group did not make recommendations on, or made a recommendation to not incorporate hurricane evacuation as part of the scoring. Just it wasn't a good fit for it. And so.
They typically don't have hurricanes in Raleigh as well.
Well, but it wasn't just there were other types of issues that were similar that we were looked at throughout the state. It could
So
be
that wouldn't be under or considered even under the accessibility and connectivity?
the accessibility connectivity is about improving access to job centers.
And that doesn't get scored under the statewide, the accessibility doesn't?
So if you take 7 hours to get there and you missed your 8-hour shift, it's just your SOL, I guess.
Well, that's where all the work and the businesses is over
That's what
there,
I'm
so
saying.
yeah.
As I can say, as part of that hurricane evacuation discussion, then we looked at what about mudslides or landslides in the western part of the state?
Yeah.
Or when I-40 shut down, how does this impact scoring? And ultimately, those are more incident related as opposed to longer term issues, due to congestion or freight movement or safety and so forth.
Does it take in consideration any type of life safety factors like ambulances, fire trucks, apparatus, stuff like that? There's no consideration for that?
We don't get into the specifics.
You don't get that deep, okay.
Correct. All right.
On your traffic counts, does that count for any traffic coming from the southern end? Are you counting just traffic coming from the northern end going to Corolla? Are you counting traffic coming from the southern end that's going to Corolla?
As part of the scoring, I have to go back to look at the specifics to where the data was derived for the bridge. My guess is the majority of the data probably came, or the traffic data probably came from the Wright Brothers Memorial Bridge.
Yeah, that's a good
kind of
point,
a
because that
parallel
would be
route.
skewed then, because there's a lot of traffic comes through 64th to the
Yeah, we
south
get a
end
lot
up
of
there.
traffic
Yeah.
from 64 coming up.
You probably take that number and double it then, probably.
Actually have figured out that they can bypass, Currituck.
And Wright Brothers Bridge, you're right.
And come through Eatonton and come that way and get here quicker.
Yeah.
The traffic has increased coming, you see the increase in traffic like when you come through Columbia or Plymouth on a Saturday where it didn't used to be backed up. Now it's a parking lot because people are actually starting to go around, go north. So,
That's a good
It's
point.
anybody, and like when people come, like for state officials, like the governor came a couple times for like bad traffic, and Senator Hannon can attest how the traffic was real backed up and bad in the Outer Banks, and I think they went to Southern Shores. I'm pretty sure they never went north of the Wright Memorial Bridge, but it's all good. And they came, like he said, that way around to completely bypass where the problem is.
Gotcha.
Bobby is the man.
Yeah, could you get that, I'm sorry, but could you get that information to us if that traffic count was just Wright Brother Bridge, or did it take into account the southern traffic, like Senator Hayek said?
Coming through
Because
Columbia and
you could
stuff.
probably double that number then if you did that, okay.
You could probably
Majority, I mean, I could,
Four
it
times.
would have been where the traffic counts are, and my guess is being
Correct.
pulled from the bridge.
Yeah, if that is, then it's gonna be skewed, correct.
Not,
Yeah, all right.
not to belabor the point, but several years ago, the board and NCDOT worked together to try to get the traffic diverted to have people go through Edenton, Columbia, and that way.
Yes.
That is something that we asked to be done because of the traffic being so bad here. So the DOT should have information on when that was done and how that was put together. Of course, that's been
15 years ago, probably.
yeah, been 10 or more years ago that we did that,
I
trying
remember
to
that back
ease
in
some of the traffic congestion. So DOT was a part of that with the county and the rental machines on the Outer Banks when we did that. So there should be some data when we started asking for people to do that, just for your information.
Sure, we can look into that. I can talk to Ronnie.
Kind of to elaborate on that, they were trying to direct people that were going to Kill Devil Hills or all the way to Hatteras to go around to eliminate a lot of traffic on the mainland, then going up to the Duck area.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, kind of letting people know, hey, if you're, like the LED signs would say, if you're going to Hatteras, go here. Go around,
Right.
because you're gonna get there quicker.
Okay, makes sense. I'll talk to Ronnie about that and see what we can find. All right, so that was kind of an overview of the STIP and the prioritization process. Now I want to take a deeper dive into the Mid-Currituck Bridge. So this was evaluated in what we call prioritization 3.0. This was back in 2014. This is the first round of prioritization under the STI law. And so it's evaluated as a new bridge across the Sound. Total cost a little over $400 million, $238 million or so from toll revenue. That was the expected available funding from toll revenue, and $173 million of STI dollars. And those would be state and federal funds, or federal funds.
And what year was that?
It was evaluated in 2014, I believe.
But we've been talking about this bridge for a lot longer than that. Do you know when it first went on the books and the original cost?
I don't know the original cost. I know it was 1989 when it
89.
was first came on the books. It was part of the Highway Trust Fund when that was created in 1989.
I'm thinking it was around less than 300 million at that time.
That wouldn't surprise me back, yeah. So in prioritization 3.0, this project scored high enough for funding at the division needs level. You can see both the RPO and division assigned points to it, the regional and the division level, but at the division level, just the RPO assigned points to it. But in prioritization 3.0, there was enough money to go down the list and the project was picked up. And it was programmed in the 2016 to 2025 step with right-of-way construction in 2019 as a toll project, with the understanding that it'd have a maximum of $173 million of STI dollars. So again, the STI dollars are state and federal dollars that are subject to the prioritization process. So fast forward several years, and now that project has been evaluated as a turnpike project, or excuse me, a toll project. And there are two types of toll projects here, and it's kind of, and so as part of a tolling analysis, we have to do what's called a comparative analysis, where a toll project is compared as a North Carolina Turnpike Authority project, where they manage and operate the project. That's the traditional toll. And then there's the P3 option, the public-private partnership. And what you see here on the slide are essentially the summary of the different costs. So as a traditional toll project, the year of expenditure costs are about 1.2 billion versus a P3, it's about 1.1 billion. And then if you look at, then we have to account for the toll revenues minus life cycle costs, and you can see the numbers on your screen. The total project funding gap, meaning once you factor in the tolls, is about $1 billion for a traditional project, or just shy of 900 million if the project is delivered as a public-private partnership.
Excuse me real
And
quick.
then,
At the bottom of the right corner, are you getting that in there? Can that be taken away?
is that better?
Oh, there it
Thank
is. Yep,
you.
good. Yep, good. I
Yeah.
can see it. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
So, and then lastly, that funding gap, once you factor in that $173 million of STI dollars, leaves a gap of either $832 million or about $700 million. So with either delivery method as a traditional toll turnpike managed product or a public-private partnership, the project unfortunately is not financially feasible without additional funding. So that's kind of unfortunately where we are today, one of the key takeaways.
And the total cost now is anticipated to be how much?
Anywhere right now between 1.1 and 1.2 billion dollars, depending on the delivery method.
Where did those numbers come from?
These came from the comparative analysis done by the North Carolina Turnpike Authority last year.
And Wake's Bridge is how much? 1 billion? Is that what I heard?
1.1 and 1.2 billion.
1.1 for Wake's
Did you
Bridge?
say it was an 89 less than?
1.1 for
300?
public-private partnership and 1.2 for the traditional toll
Okay.
option.
What's the difference in the P3 toll and the traditional toll? Why are there different costs associated with them?
I'd like to phone my friend on Teams if he can answer that.
No.
David Roy from Turnpike Authority is best equipped to answer that question.
All right.
David, did you hear that question?
Yeah.
We're generally going to keep higher contingencies than a developer would in the P3 model. They can inject additional equity if something were to go wrong after the fact. We as the Turnpike Authority have less access to additional funds should the cost of construction exceed our cost estimates. So that's generally this case. Now, that's not always the case. When we're analyzing or evaluating a traditional delivery for a P3 delivery of a project, There are other considerations for express lane projects or kind of greenfield projects, but for a bridge project like Mid-Currituck, that's generally what we see.
Quick question on the STIP funding. So we know we have 173 million allocated for STIP funding currently, and it says that funding was allocated from the P3 in the division needs. So is that because that's when the project first scored? And is that something that could be adjusted?
So that $173 million is from the 2016-2025 STIP when the project was committed and selected for funding. And so typically with toll projects, the amount of STI funds at the time the project's committed generally stays the same.
What was the, for the net cash flow from tolling operations, what was the base toll used there to calculate that?
David, I'll let you answer that one.
There's a range of toll rates. This, the assumed toll rates in the traffic and revenue forecast are based on season, day of the week, et cetera. So a Saturday in July is going to be priced differently than a Tuesday in February. Generally speaking, and the traffic and revenue forecast is available online, that has the assumed toll rates. But in the peak period in the base or the traditional toll model, I want to say in the $35 range. For the traditional toll, probably in the $40 range for the P3 toll. They can be a little more aggressive with their pricing and their forecasting. In an off-peak weekday, you're looking closer to maybe $8 or $9, $10, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
These people that are coming from up north, I mean, like, and I'm not taking shots or nothing. They don't care how much it costs. If it was $100. I mean, I was just telling Commissioner Breathwaite, I went to Bethpage to the Ryder Cup. I rented, because I have SUVs and trucks, I rented a car for 2 days and fuel. I paid $280 in tolls, $260 in renting a nice car that was good on gas and fuel, $280 tolls to go to New York, back here, $280, $260 to rent a car 2 days and fuel. They'll pay whatever. If it was $500, people would pay it.
Yeah, and I think we raised that question at the Transportation Committee meeting, and if I remember correctly, the answer was there are limitations to what the tolls could be here in this particular project.
David, I'll let you answer that one.
Well, in the model, they do a value of time analysis, which basically says, okay, we think you're going to save a couple hours by taking the Mid-Currituck Bridge as opposed to the alternative. What is somebody willing to pay? You're right. I think everybody, for the most part, agrees that a number of people would certainly probably be willing to pay higher than what those toll rate assumes, but there is diminishing return there, right? The higher the rate, the more people are going to choose to take an alternative route. So, when we're doing a forecast, we don't look to price or set the toll rate at the absolute maximum rate while we're forecasting. So you're right. There is a toll rate that could be a little higher that would likely generate a little more revenue. But when we are talking to rating agencies, investors, and others, they like to see a rate that is not completely at that peak point. So we don't model a revenue scenario, but something in the 85 to 90% range.
Right, and I think thank you for that. And I think the thing to keep in mind is, we can talk about tolls and, generating some additional revenue from a higher toll, but I don't know that there's a toll that we could put on this project that would make up $700 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the challenge here. The volumes projected over the Mid-Currituck Bridge just aren't sufficient to make up this kind of gap at any toll rate. And then again, obviously, the higher the rate, the more people would choose to take the alternate route.
How actively are we seeking money from the federal government?
David, can you talk about the grants that have been applied for?
Yeah, so the Turnpike Authority, I believe, has applied for 7 rounds of infra and mega over the last number of years, and they have been received well at the federal level. The one kind of red flag that we've always heard in our debriefs is that the project has been subject to litigation. Obviously, when there are requirements for grant obligation dates or when we would need to be ready to spend any kind of grant funds that were received, they want to make sure there are no obstacles that are going to keep us from moving the project forward. So to date, the project obviously has not been successful at receiving a grant, but there has always been that litigation or some litigation kind of hanging over the project's head, if you will. We would certainly anticipate continuing to apply in future rounds of grant funding, and once we clear the most current challenge on the permit, I would expect again it to be well received and certainly have a chance for funding at the federal level. Now, the caveat, of course, is this is still a very sizable gap. Generally speaking, grant funds, you're not going to be awarded a grant for more than 50% of the total project cost, and usually it's somewhat less than that. So, a grant to make up the entire gap is unlikely, but the project does have potential to be competitive in future rounds of grant funding.
Well, that every bridge is subject to litigation. The Wright Memorial to the Bass Knife Bridge to you name it, they're all under litigation. And they get challenged at every way through the process. So how do those bridges get funding from the federal government? If they have the same challenges. Take Alligator River, for instance.
So the Alligator River. Oh, go ahead, David.
No, I was going to take that from you.
Okay. So the Alligator River won a grant. I can't remember. It's Mega Infra. They're different federal programs. That's what Infra, Mega. They're different federal grant programs. But it did win. There's also Large Bridge too. It did win a grant. I cannot remember the exact amount. 100, okay, yeah. Thank you.
10 million is broadband utilities, but 100.
So there were a number of factors that went into that. Obviously, the department kicked in a sizable chunk and is funding a large portion of that project, all but 110 million. So to my knowledge, that project has not faced the litigation that the other bridges have had.
How much?
And I will say, I think there's certainly a risk. Obviously, the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge did receive a large bridge grant a year or two ago. I think the Fed, without speaking too much for them, the Feds maybe view a risk of a litigation versus active litigation a little differently. And unfortunately, Mid-Currituck has been tied up in active litigation since basically 2019.
Kind of I'm sorry, I didn't know, were you done or? Okay, well, just a follow-up quick question then. So what you're saying then is for any federal grants to be even considered, this has to be an active project. The minute it goes inactive, they're not going to even look at it anymore, correct?
From a department standpoint, we want NORD to.
Well, like the federal funding grants that we're looking for.
Correct. We want the project to be active. The project has to be eligible for STI funds. The project needs to be what we consider scheduled for delivery in the front part of the STIP and so forth.
Okay.
So I'm not sure the exact number, but we spent roughly $60 million recently. So what do we do with what we've done now? Do we just walk away from it?
The $60 million you're referring to, I believe, is the money that's been spent on preliminary engineering. Is that correct? That has got us to where we are today. Obviously, we've spent a lot of money doing the environmental analysis, coming up with a design, evaluating the tolls, whether doing that comparative analysis and so forth. No one, and I'll get to the options here in a second, but no one's suggesting to walk away from this project.
Okay.
I know you all have reviewed cost and tolls over the years, but now suddenly it's this huge discrepancy that we don't feel like we can make it work. Has there been concerns like this prior to now?
David, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, certainly the project has been tight for a number of years, and in fact, even back in I think 2010, 11, 12, in that time frame when the department was pursuing a P3, a progressive P3 on the project. Ultimately, that was not successful because they could not reach an agreement on funding. With previous cost estimates, while it was tight, we thought there was a path forward. Obviously, with the cost escalation we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years and the most recent cost estimate, unfortunately, just because the cost of the bridge, the cost of projects have gone up, that hasn't really changed the revenue forecast, right? The toll rates, the toll revenue generated is roughly the same as it was, 5, 6, even 10 years ago. And there are a number of reasons for that, but certainly the project has been tight for a number of years, but we thought there was an opportunity to make it work until we saw the escalations we've seen over the last number of years here.
If I can refer back to the federal funding. So do you remember when the last lawsuit was cleared up until this most recent one about the permit? It seems like that was at least 2 years ago. I lose track of time.
What was this question?
Yeah, I think that, I believe the Fourth Circuit ruled in the department's favor sometime in 23, 24, and that is what freed the department, the Turnpike Authority, to begin pursuing the 4 required permits. The permits were the kind of next opportunity for a legal challenge, and that's what we received last year.
Did we apply for the federal funding after that lawsuit was finally finished? Because what we were told was that now that this lawsuit has been settled, there's nothing in our way to build. There's nothing obstructing us from building this bridge, is what we were told. We applied for funding after that.
We have applied, the Turnpike has applied for every round of discretionary grant funds that I'm aware of since, I believe, even before 2019. I don't recall the exact timing of the most recent round and whether that happened kind of in between the challenge to the environmental document and the challenge to the permit. But we have applied for every round of discretionary grant funds that have been available.
Would it be possible for you to get that back to us?
Yeah, I can find a timeline.
One other, we talked about cost escalation. It obviously is not isolated to just this project. The department has faced substantial cost increases on projects throughout the state, and it's a challenge we're dealing with. We're for the 2024 to 2033 step. We didn't actually have money to select projects through the prioritization process. We actually had to defund many projects because of the cost escalations, and we experienced that in the current step too. We're hoping now we have a much better handle on the costs. We hope the costs have kind of steadied out, leveled out a little bit, but that's been a big department-wide challenge, and not just in this state, all across the country as well. So.
And when exactly was this decision made? It's just been within the last month?
The decision
It's not fiscally responsible to make plans to
I think
move
she's
forward.
referring to the result from the comparative analysis that I think you gave it to us in February. Was that
correct? David
right?
presented this information in February, just basically saying the cost of the project exceeds the available funding at this point. So no decisions been made, just laying out the information.
I have a question about the permitting process. Permits aren't forever. They expire. As my understanding, we're getting close to the end of some of the permits that have been approved and would have to start over again on the permitting process. Can you comment on that, or did I get bad information?
David, I'm going to defer this one to you if you have that information.
Yeah, obviously, I'm not the engineer. I think I have that answer, but let me, give me a second to find it.
We'll come back to you if you're able to get that.
Come back, yeah.
All right, keep going.
So where do we go from here? 2 options were presented to the RPO in March. One is basically the status quo. Let's not change anything. Let's keep the current path. Well, the department will continue to work through the legal challenges. We'll continue to seek the additional funds such as federal grants. However, the project will continue to tie up the $173 million in the Division 1 division needs category. And just for clarification, $145 million is within that 26 to 35 window. But ultimately, without any additional funds, the project cannot move forward to right-of-way and construction until that funding is secured. The second option is that the RPO and the department, essentially the division, agree to change the project to funded for preliminary engineering only. Essentially moves this project to the back part of the STIP where it loses its quote-unquote committed status. If this scenario were to happen, the project then competes for funding in Prioritization 8.0 and is eligible for funding in the statewide mobility category, Region A, or the Division 1 category, or all three, really. In this option, the department will, again, continue to work through legal challenges and continue to seek additional alternative funds. But that $173 million becomes available for other projects in the division needs category. Could be used to potentially accelerate existing projects and or used for projects coming out of Prioritization 8.0, which is, again, the current round. And so because we're at the point with Prioritization 8.0, we're going to be releasing the scores at the beginning of May. We need a decision by April 17th if the RPO decides to go this way or not. And this is just the option for the RPO to make. If they choose to do nothing, we'll continue on the path of option one. The status quo.
So the RPO would decide where that $173 million would be reallocated.
The RPO would make the decision on whether or not the project would be evaluated in P 8.0.
Who decides where that $173 million goes?
So we'll work closely with the division to see if any of the projects could be accelerated. If there are any potential projects that are ready in the hopper in Division 1, could be accelerated, because many of them were delayed over the last several years.
Well, see, Currituck County's been delayed forever, and we never get any of these funds, and we've been waiting for this, and now it's gonna get taken away, so on the back burner again, and we're just down the bottom of the totem pole again.
So the other piece of that too is that there could be more money available for projects coming out of Prioritization 8.0.
Yeah, but my question again is, will that money stay in our division, or is that going to go statewide?
That 173 stays in Division 1.
Bucket A.
Division 1, not regional.
wrong
This is
bucket.
Division 1.
Bucket 1 in division.
That's our region.
So what do we have other than the bridge right now that we're waiting on?
I got some potholes.
Potholes are a different funding source.
So none.
Yeah.
Well, not Island
If
Bridge.
it gets moved to option 2,
Non-Island Bridge.
will we continue to, because it basically becomes an inactive project when it gets moved to the back, does that mean we won't continue to reach out for federal grant funds?
So this is just what happens if option 2 is basically saying, hey, let's evaluate the project through the prioritization process. And I can show you in the next slide what possible outcomes are. So if you mind holding that thought, I'll get back to you.
I got
One quick point.
Sure.
So this bridge will even be added another $173 million short. So instead of $800 million short, we go to $1 billion short, is what you're saying, if it goes to option 2.
If you're referring to yes.
That $173 million right now is in that bridge, and then it goes, and then, so instead of being this much short, we're this much short.
And you've got continued increase in costs as time goes on. It's going to continue to get more expensive. So
Yeah, and more out of reach. So if we got 173 million that is setting earmarked essentially for this bridge right now, and we go through the STIP coming up, you said that it could be statewide mobility, Region A, or Division 1 that would acquire additional funds. I assume that, being the fact 40% state mobility, but we could get another, we could double it, we could, triple it almost maybe, and make up a lot of that funding gap in that process, or we can just release the funds and Go back to square one.
I think if I remember correctly, you all ran some estimates on where the project might fall out in terms of if it got moved back to P8.
Yes, let me get through the next couple slides to
Okay.
answer several questions.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we'll shut up. for a minute, okay.
So if the project is evaluated through P8, some potential outcomes. The project could score high enough for funding in any of the three categories, statewide, Region A, or Division 1. And if this is the case, the project would still be likely funded for preliminary engineering only while those legal challenges are resolved, right? We don't want to tie up funds while the legal challenges are ongoing. In this case, the project would automatically recompete in the subsequent round of prioritization. If the product does not, and one thing I will say is if it does score high enough in the statewide or Region A category or Division 1, I mean, the cost that we would look to fund would be whatever cost is used in the prioritization process. So it would come with $1 billion, we'd evaluate the project with $1 billion gap, essentially, or basically the money without the
difference.
$173 million. So there is a potential that it could score high enough, let's say statewide category, and be eligible for $1 billion. We have to consider other constraints within the law. There is actually what's known as a corridor cap that limits the amount of funding a project can have over a time period. But the point is it could receive substantially more than the $173 million if it scores high enough. If it does not score high enough or funding is not available, the department will need to decide how to bring preliminary engineering, including permitting, potentially to a logical stopping point and how to handle legal challenges. Once that STIP is adopted, and if that project is not funded in the STIP, we by law shouldn't be spending state trust funds on the project because it didn't score high enough in prioritization. And then the RPO would need to submit the project in the subsequent round, P9, to be evaluated. So, what have we done? We looked at potentially how it might have scored in the previous round if the project were evaluated. Our analysis indicated would have ranked, not great in the statewide category, roughly a little over 200 out of nearly 600. In terms of funding, I think we had about a little over $1 billion, and only the top 22 projects were selected. In the Region A category, it was a different story. It did score fairly high, 15 out of 156, so certainly the top 10%, and this assumes both the division and the RPO assigned 100 points to the project. At the end of the day, the funding will still remain a challenge with this project. Based on what I just mentioned, the product is not likely to score high enough for funding in the statewide mobility category. As we talked about earlier, it is competing against projects in highly urbanized, congested areas. Think of I-85, I-77, projects on I-40, and so forth, where, as we talked about, 30% of your score is based on congestion. One of the other challenges is that Region A is the smallest by population, again, only receiving 8% of the regional impact funds. And for reference, in the current STIP, the 2035 STIP, there was only $800 million available for all projects in Region A. And that includes bridge, safety, and projects selected through prioritization.
Just a guess, but population doesn't include tourism.
Population is it comes from the Office of State and Budget Management, state certified population. So, which I believe is probably based on permanent residence, but
Which makes
cannot.
makes northeastern North Carolina about the size of a voting precinct in Raleigh,
Yeah.
or less.
Yeah, bucket C should have been a little bit bigger.
And so just for comparison, about $800 million was available in Division 1 for all projects. So again, neither one of those buckets has a large enough amount of funding to cover that $832 million gap.
This scoring puts us in a situation much like the tier system.
Yep.
So
Yes.
underfunding the rural areas, and it is underfunding if you're only using 8% of it, will ensure that the rural areas remain rural and remain underfunded and remain without growth. That's what that does.
This is
I'm not saying that.
Yes, yeah,
I'm just telling you that's what we're fighting right now is Okay, so we want economic development in northeastern North Carolina, but we don't have the roads for it. Our
But
roads
do we?
can't handle it. Well, until we start putting more money into our roads and our infrastructure, then we won't grow. We'll remain on the bottom of the totem pole until that changes. So we talk about economic development and economic growth in our rural areas every single day in Raleigh. It's the buzzword of all the buzzwords. Y'all know that. Well, until we start funding rural areas more, so people will come here and we will have economic growth, then we're never going to change
Senator,
what we're saying.
I-87 means in 87 years.
Do you get my point, though? I mean,
Certainly understand your point.
do you know any legislators that can work on that?
I might. I think, but you bring up, I think it's a statewide issue. Just there's not enough transportation funding in general, and whether the projects in Raleigh or northeastern North Carolina, the funding has not kept up with the cost of the projects, and that's anywhere across the state. I mean, as I mentioned, we've had substantial cost increases. We had a project in Nashville that's what we thought was 800 million, and we got the bids in, they were over 1.2 billion. We had to kind of de-scope that project to bring it down to something we could live with. There have been substantial cost increases wherever you go, and the transportation funding just unfortunately has not kept up with the cost growth.
What are we doing about that?
I cannot speak to that. That would be probably a legislative discussion.
I long for the days when a member of the legislature could just put a project in the budget and it could go through. It was a lot simpler back then. And then we moved to the, I guess you call it equity, quantitative, equality, whatever. And so the folks in the rural areas, they can't get anything done because 8%. And Senator Hannig is it 11 counties?
10 currently.
10 currently? And how many counties are in this division?
14.
14. So, you got 15% of the counties, and we don't even get an equal percentage.
Well, that 8% is 8% of 30%.
Yeah.
Because it's over the at once.
Okay. What's your next slide?
The next slide's a summary slide, but one thing I would like to point out with STI law is with the division needs category, you saw that every division gets the same amount of funding initially. It's roughly $70 million a year. In the highly urbanized divisions, a large chunk of that actually goes to the MPOs, and they select their projects. So I think it's in the Division 5 area. They get roughly $70 million a year. $30 million of that goes to the capital area MPO, and the Durham or the Triangle West are MPO. So that's a large, leaving only $40 million a year for bridge, safety, and project selected through the prioritization process. So, is it the same? I think the issue is that there's just not enough funding for transportation overall. But I will say, when the STI law was created, it was done to focus on where the congestion is, but also in the division, the statewide level is more focused on where the congestion is, and it does tend to focus on the urban areas. The regional category is probably a combination of rural and urban, because depending on which region you're in, if you're in Region E, as an example, that stretches all the way from Charlotte to Chatham County, just outside the Triangle. It includes many of the rural areas in the state. So like just outside Pinehurst, I mean, there's Southern Pines, Division 8, they're receiving a lot of money or a substantial amount of money for the regional impact category. It's not all going to areas like Charlotte. But then you get down to division needs category, the more rural divisions actually have a greater shot at getting funded through the prioritization process.
Well, North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, but it sounds like we weren't prepared with this type of infrastructure for all those people.
Just for information's sake, most people I talk to have no idea how DOT gets funded. Could you just elaborate on that just a little bit?
So we receive funding from the combination of the motor fuels tax, the highway use tax on the state side. Those are and DMV fees. Those are the.
So my point is there is no direct funding that comes from the North Carolina legislature to DOT. It's all use taxes and fees.
Well, there was actually a few years ago, I want to say it's 2022, the General Assembly included some of the sales tax or revenues from the sales tax that transfers into the Highway Trust Fund, and that was to account for fees or sales tax generated from automotive uses, transportation-related uses.
That was because of the electric vehicles, was it not?
No, that was actually nothing to do with electric vehicles. It was try to focus on, again, revenue or sales tax generated from transportation-related uses. So when you buy tires or batteries or other car parts.
But I think a few years ago, if my memory serves right, DOT was about $700 million upside down in some projects, and the General Assembly had to do a direct appropriation, if my memory serves me correct. And then also, if my memory serves correct, DOT had basically done some takings of property without paying. They weren't letting people use their properties, but you weren't paying them for those properties, and a judge ruled y'all had to pay out a large sum of money to some property owners as well. So you've had a couple of glitches over the last few years that I hope that the Secretary has been able to kind of get his arms and head around for the DOT.
We've certainly learned from those experiences, yes, sir.
And we also intermittently, we do funds, like when the ferry division is short on funding for fuel or whatever, the General Assembly will allocate those funds. So
Yeah.
To your point about EVs, there is a hybrid, or I don't know about hybrid. I know that if you have an EV car, you do pay an additional fee when you register each year.
Right. Okay.
So just to kind of quickly summarize, essentially the Mid-Currituck Bridge is not financially feasible without additional funds, and then two options are being presented in front of the RPO board. Essentially it's status quo, let's not change anything, but ultimately, the project will continue to tie up the $173 million, and it ultimately cannot move forward without additional funds. Or option two is have the project evaluated in P 8.0 to see if it scores high enough for additional funds in statewide Region A or Division 1.
Is this the same presentation that was made to the RPO?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay.
So, if I can, so, again, I lose track of time. So roughly 4 years ago, the bridge was at $650 million. With $173 million, even with the federal grant, like you said, typically it's $100 million or $150 million. We were still $300 million short. But there's no way the bridge is going to be funded 4 years ago. Well, now, fast forward to today, in a matter of 3 months, all of a sudden, there's no way the bridge is going to get funded. So, what are your thoughts? And it's just your opinion.
Bless you.
You can turn the thing off if you want. I'm saying, if it gets moved to option two, what I see is the likelihood of that bridge ever being built is near zero.
At this point, I can't state what would happen if it moved to option two. I kind of gave you some possible outcomes earlier.
Well, that's important for the RPO to know.
Correct. I mean, we ran the scoring analysis out of
Has a
P7.
funding
A
gap.
decent chance of getting funds in the regional category. Just being honest, I don't think it would score high enough in the statewide category. But it's possible the region category, and it could also score high enough for funds in the division category as well, or maybe a combination of the two if it scores.
Would it be important for the RPO to understand, to move it to option two, that the likelihood is near zero?
I disagree with that statement. I think it's, at that point, I guess the way I look at it is where we are right now, there's a $700 to $832 million funding gap in the division needs category. Right now, there's really no possible path forward given that large gap. As David mentioned.
But there was no possible way forward 4 years ago.
Maybe, that may have been the case.
So what's changed from 4 years ago to today, other than the number?
Yeah, the cost has increased, right?
Right,
So,
but again, undoable 4 years ago and undoable now is the same thing. Why are we at that point now is what I'm asking.
as opposed to 4 years ago, I can't explain it.
And why have we spent $60 million of taxpayer money up there knowing that we had this good funding gap 4 years ago?
David, you might be able to better answer that one.
I mean, if I may, I think, you know, as you referenced 4 or 5 years ago, that funding gap, you know, maybe still existed to a degree, but not what we were seeing, obviously, today with the recent, you know, cost escalation we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So, you know, there's a difference between being in the ballpark where a discretionary grant would completely close the gap versus what we're looking at today, where, you know, we just don't see, you know, a single solution for the size of the funding gap we're facing.
Right, so again, I can't keep track of time. So at that time, the bridge was right around 600 million, 625 million. And then right near the end of COVID, they were saying it's about 800 million. But nobody said anything about the funding gap then. Here we are today, well, the funding gap's too big, but now we spend all this money up there. So it doesn't make any sense to me why we're all of a sudden at this point.
Maybe a couple points. I think certainly with the litigation over the last 5 years, you know, that has tied up a lot of things. Certainly that 60 million hasn't been spent in the last 5 years. It's been spent over the last 30 years. Certainly some portion of it, you know, has been spent pursuing the environmental document and now the permits, some early acquisition of right-of-way, things like that. But that certainly hasn't been over the last 4 or 5 years. The bulk of that was prior to.
So if option 2 is the outcome of this, then there's no way we'd ever find out what federal funds or grants could be available, because it would be dead right there, correct? Because we can't apply for them.
Option 2 just says we want, says the RPO and the division agree to have the project score in P8. And I guess the thing, as long as it scores high enough in one of the 3 categories, we can continue to pursue the grants.
And they simulated it through, running it through, if it had been gone through the P7 and came up with some numbers. So let's say we go to option 2 and 173 million that's allocated for the project goes back to the division. We go back into P8 and it qualifies. It scores high enough. Maybe you get 200 million back, 250, right? And during this whole time, the cost of the project is going to continue to go up. So it seems like either option that you go in, there's going to be a major gap. You might get a little bit more money in option 2. You may get nothing. You may not score high enough at all. But I don't know. I don't see where it makes enough of a difference to close that gap, other than just the idea of keeping the project alive.
Well, and that's the point, is keeping the project alive in option 1. And that's what I want to make sure that the RPO understands. If it stays in option 1, then they're going to continue to try to get federal funding for the project.
Correct.
That's what, I want to make sure the RPO understands that. It doesn't sound like they were in that scenario at all. So when do they get that explained to them?
The next meeting is
15th?
It's a 17th.
Make sure they know that.
This is 17th. Oh, yeah.
April 15th is the
April
RPO.
15th is the RPO meeting. So will this whole presentation get done again? Will there be discussion prior to them voting, or how's that going to
I believe the plan is to do a quick review of the issue and the options. And so during that discussion, I'm sure that will come up. And option 1 does keep the project alive, in hopes that it does get additional funds that way.
that will continue to? Okay.
So quick
Are there
question on.
Will there be public comment?
So quick question on the federal grant money. So if the department still continues to seek federal grant money, is that a one-time thing? So for example, are we able to seek grant funding for 2027 and then seek additional grant funding in 2028 to maybe kind of cumulatively cover that gap? Or is it just kind of a one-time thing and that's it?
So with the federal grant program, we can always apply for multiple grant programs. And we heard there's large bridge, there's infra, there's mega. I'm using terms of the actual discretionary grants that can be applied for. We can, the department or the Turnpike Authority could submit the project under multiple programs. Historically, most projects only receive one grant. And then the other issue is right now, the grants come out of funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, which is just set to expire at the end of federal fiscal year 26, so in September, right? And so we don't know what's going to happen with the next authorization act. Will there continue to be discretionary grant programs? We're not sure at this point. David could speak to on some of the projects that have been applied for grants under multiple programs, and I think we've only been awarded one, or only been successful at receiving one grant under multiple programs. David, can you talk about Cape Fear?
I mean, generally that's right, David. Generally, the Federal Highways has awarded a project one grant. There are certainly instances where across the country where you've seen several grants awarded to some mega projects, but in almost all cases, that funding is still limited to 50% of the total project cost. So, it would be unlikely that the gap could be completely closed with a discretionary grant. And just quickly, if I may, I did some research. There was one round of discretionary grants between the Fourth Circuit ruling in favor of the department and the permit challenge being pursued by SALC last year. That happened to coincide with the time that Cape Fear Memorial Bridge was awarded the large bridge grant. So Mid-Currituck was not successful in that round. And again, I hypothesize, but I suspect the fact that there had been a challenge and there was the likelihood of future challenges to the permits, given the nature of the litigation, who was pursuing the challenge likely played into it.
When did the challenge from the SELC come?
I'm sorry?
When did the challenge from the SELC come for the permitting process?
In 2025, let's see, DEQ permit was issued in September. Water Resources, Coastal Management, both in September. Corps of Engineers in October of 25, and then SCLC challenged DEQ, the CAMA permit, in October of 2025. And then to the other question, only the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permit expires. That is slated for December 31st, 2030. But talking to our project development folks, it's not uncommon to request extensions to those permits and for those to be granted.
So when was the application put in for the grant?
I believe 2024.
So in 2024,
Looks like
in 2024 there was no litigation.
That's correct. And I believe that it looks like the NOFO was maybe issued in March with an application deadline in May.
Right. So in 2024 there was no litigation, so that wouldn't be a reason for them denying the grant.
Again, I can't speculate, but obviously, having had litigation for a number of years on the project and understanding that for the project to move forward, permits would need to be required and the opportunity for those permits to be challenged still existed.
Or, I apologize. What's your name again?
David Wasserman.
Mr. Wasserman said that they don't base those grants on the possibility of litigation. About the possibility of future litigation, so that you were contradicting each other here.
Well, and we're speculating on why. These are based on debriefs that we've been involved in after each round of funding. Obviously, those decisions are made at the federal level and ultimately by the US DOT Secretary of Transportation. So maybe the better answer is we shouldn't speculate on why or why not the project was successful. I can tell you on a number of occasions the project has been kind of rated based on their scoring as I forget the exact terminology, but it met the criteria to be considered for the grant at the secretary level, but was ultimately not awarded the grant.
Do we have that information as to why it didn't score or didn't qualify for the grant? Can we get that from the federal DOT?
And I don't suspect that they would provide kind of formal written reasoning beyond what they speak to in their debrief, and we can certainly provide notes from the debrief. But again, our debrief only goes to whether the project scored well enough to advance in the rounds of before the grant was actually awarded. But yeah, we can see what we can provide as far as the notes from the debriefs that we've had.
That would be fantastic.
Sure.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, we have another work session we have to get to before our rather lengthy commissioners meeting tonight. So if anyone has any last question, get it now.
I have one. Are there any other projects on the books with you all right now that are similar to this one as far as cost and as far as a deficit in funding?
I would have to look into that. David, are you aware of any such projects?
Told or not told, because obviously the majority of the projects that are submitted for each round of prioritization are not ultimately able to be funded.
Is it only 22?
The majority are not able to be funded, even though they've been approved and moving forward and spending money on them?
It's a funding gap.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get ranked and then there has to be money for them. So if there's not money, then they don't.
So for comparisons, for
One of
reference.
the previous slides said it was like 22 out of
That doesn't make
100 and
sense to
something.
spend $60 million.
So for in the last round of prioritization, we had $144 billion worth of projects that were submitted. We funded $5 billion, just to give you an idea. So it again goes to show that there's just not enough transportation funding.
And
in the
of
state.
those that were funded, are there any others in our situation?
This project is one of few that I'm aware of that has such a large funding gap. All the other ones that we're talking, there are a lot of other projects that have tolls on them, and whether the tolls cover the cost of that project or cover that, I think that's still being evaluated. Is that correct, David?
That's right. I mean, obviously this project has a long history and is somewhat unique and where it sits today, particularly that it was funded at the division level, not at the statewide level. I'm not aware of any other toll project to date that has been funded at the division level.
It was funded at the division level because that's where we were told to put it, just for clarification to everyone. Anyways, I would like to thank our representative, Ms. Judge, for coming today. You're always welcome. Senator Hannig, as always, you're welcome, your stomping grounds. And to all our Department of Transportation folks, we appreciate everything that you do with no money. And we hope that maybe you can find some for us. We have a lot of other needs as well, but we do thank you for coming and presenting this to us today. It's certainly given me a better understanding, and I think for the other board members as well.
Other
So,
citizens too that'll be viewing.
yeah,
this, they'll be able to
and
understand
this
more.
is recorded, so
It'll be
our
played over
residents
and
can
over.
look at it and see. So we just thank you again for coming. And while you're here, spend a little money. The sales tax helps our students, and we'd appreciate it. Thank
And
you.
a little bit of that goes to our roads.
Yeah. So I'm going to take 5 minutes for a restroom break, but